that is there, but God doesn't say, hey, all of you are now completely devoid of goodness. He doesn't take away the image of himself from Adam and Eve and from all humanity. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Fractured Faith Podcast. Socio, greetings. This is your host, Joshua S. Hopping, Christian mystic and Jadagi citizen, coming at you from the land of the Osage in Northwest Arkansas. I definitely have a kind of a story to tell you guys right now about raising a demon child. How's that for a title or introduction? Only this is not a parenting podcast. This is a fractured faith. This is one where we're shifting our belief systems, but it really is a powerful one about total depravity and what we think about mankind and what we think about people, including our own children and our babies. And I have a story to tell you about that. But when I first became a father and having to rethink a bunch of things when it comes to my beliefs about children and my beliefs about people in general. But so like I said, it's going to be a good podcast, I believe. This is definitely one of those topics that I shifted on in my journey and has transformed the way in which I see God and the way I see people and the way I see my own children. So, first of all, we'll go and talk about what is total depravity. What do I mean by that? Well, this is a really good, it is a doctrine that's core to Calvinism and to the Reformed theology that really came roots in medieval Europe at the time, and basically is this belief that humanity, since the fall of Adam and Eve, is completely corrupted every aspect. So human nature, human beings, our flesh, our body, everything that we see around is completely corrupt and without any goodness in it, right? It's completely devoid of goodness. It is only good comes through the Creator, He, we would say in Cherokee, but only through God, the Creator, is the only good that comes in it. And they really stress the goodness of God, and they really stress the evil or the depravity and the corruptness of humanity is what that focus is. And that is one of the core doctrines that came out of it. The 5 doctrines of Calvinism: total depravity, which I said is corrupt deals; unconditional election, which is this ideal is that God has elected certain people to be saved, and only those people are. Limited atonement, again, limited people are the atonement of God is only for the certain limited people according to the condition. Irresistible grace, humans have no choice in the matter. God's grace shows up and you're in, and you have the perseverance of the saints. Once saved, always saved. It is tulip. That is really the core of Reformed Calvinist doctrine. There is soft Calvinism that will agree a little bit less of those 5 points, but that's kind of it. I'm really only talking about total depravity on there. Now, you hear me talk a lot is that I love history, right? So you will hear history, and I will give you the history, and I will pull out some of the biblical references as well. But before I get there, I want to kind of take a minute and talk about why this matters. You see, when I was growing up, again, you hear about this idea is that, when I have a child or when a kid comes in, they don't need to be taught sin because they are sinners from the beginning. So when I had my first kid and I'm bringing him home and I'm starting to hear him talk back or hear him do things that maybe is a little bit different, my first thought in my mind is that this is a little demon child and they're out to get me. They're doing this on purpose to aggravate me. They're doing whatever they're doing because they're trying to ruin my life. They're being disrespectful and they're being talking back and they're doing XYZ because they are willfully sinners, willfully engaged in this ideal of coming against me in the evil, because sin has corrupted every part of this child. Now you may think, well, what? Like blowing mind, but no, that is actually what I thought, and that's a lot of our churches and a lot of our groups that have taught that without Christ, everybody's evil, that humans are evil from the beginning. And you might even heard this concept of the age of accountability, right? That's when the humans get to be a chance to grow up and make a choice for God. Before then, they have some innocence and all these workarounds coming in. But the root is a lot of our churches have taught that as children are sinners from the moment they were born, and that in that sin they're going to be living in. And so as a parent, my job is to basically transform or beat out that sin until they become a Christian, and then God kind of takes over from there. And that really does kind of mentally challenge, and the mental health of that is insane, because here I am thinking that this is a child willfully trying to hurt me, willfully trying to cause problems because they are full of sin. Now, I'll get to how I got out of that in a bit, because I am no longer there by any means. I fully reject the doctrine of total depravity. I will say that right now, first and foremost. I reject this view, and I definitely don't think it is a biblical view. I don't think it's just historical either. But practical, for that matter. It's not even practical, because you start getting into, again, how we view our children and other people. There's definitely better ways of viewing that. But that was what I was taught. I was taught, I remember at college, it was at my undergraduate, and my professor would sing the songs about we are worms and we are nothing, and that we deserve the wrath of God and all that we have because we are sinners. And there are songs sang in church about the being sinners and being that we are worthless and that we are nothing without it. And it's just that downputting of who we were, in that by God's grace that we are now been made whole, but we are yet in ourselves and our core being bad because of that total depravity. And I would say, you hear me, I thought for a while that there was there was a concept called Arminianism. Arminianism, I always thought, was opposite of Calvinism. And when it came to the perseverance of the saints, they were. Arminians said that, hey, you can walk away from God, where Calvinists said that you have to stay in it. But what I learned is that Arminianism is a branch of Reformed theology, a branch of Calvinism, and they still agree on total depravity. They're still very much in that same vein of total depravity. And there are other schools of thought, there's other things under the wider umbrella of Christianity, of following the Creator, He, that allows for us to really transform and think differently about who humans are and how our responses is, and what the effects of sin did or did not do to us as people. So I just want to say that aside is Arminianism is a fraction or a version of Calvinism. They are all Reformed theologies. They're really cut from the same cloth, even though there is a little bit of differences on the once saved, always saved, or can you lose salvation, but they're really, really close to each other. They're closer to each other than they're not. And so I didn't want to call that out when we're talking about total depravity, because I know even in my ignorance as a while, I actually thought that Arminianism was different until I really went a little bit deeper. But let's back up a little bit here, and let's talk about the history of this concept of total depravity. Now, a lot of this comes from Augustine of Hippo, and this is a North African Berber theologian in about the 5th century. We're talking about 354 to 130 AD. And he's very, very much influential in the history of the Western Church in Europe, and even into Protestant views. In fact, Luther and Calvin both were kind of Augustinian kind of monks, and they really were there. And so they have a lot of the same ideals picked up from Augustine of Hippo. But in his arguments, he had a big argument. Augustine was fighting with this ideal with Pelagius, and they were talking about, are people free will and grace and salvation? And he really doubled down. And it's like, hey, all humanity is in bondage to sin in all its ways. And now that was kind of really the first big time that you start seeing this ideal that, humanity is completely, devoid of goodness. Before then, the first 300 years of Christianity, they had a different view, and I'll get to it in a minute, but they had a different view of what humanity was. But Augustine really was that big kind of push to get into it. Then you see about in the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas gets in there, and he talks about people who could not avoid sin after the fall. Duns Scott, which is a Scottish Catholic, say, hey, people, sin entails a lack of original righteousness, and how again you have no original righteousness or nothing there. And then Luther and Calvin really then take that up and really go even deeper and being able to say it's total depravity. Not just that you lack original righteousness, you're completely devoid or devoid of any righteousness, any goodness of all. It's gone. And they take some verses out of it, like I think Romans 3, for example, it says, "There's no one righteous, not even one. No one understands, no one who seeks God. All have turned away. All have become worthless. There's not one does good, not even one." Psalms 51 talks about brought forth iniquity and sin my mother conceived me. Ephesians 2 say you're dead in your trespasses and sins, which you used to walk. So they take a couple of these verses and they really kind of bring out and take it to the extreme. Now, I really want to kind of take back and say, you know what, that was kind of where it began, and it really kind of took off from there. Especially medieval Europe had this really big concept of shame and guilt culture that really kind of locked into it. And they really made it core. Now, prior to this, and even into even Orthodox in Roman Catholics and to this day, and a lot of other branches of Protestantism, they don't really go into the depravity. Instead, when they look at Genesis 1 and 2, and they says, you know what, humanity was birthed or born of the ground and deals in the image of the God. We were image bearers of the Most High. We had the goodness and Spirit of God breathed into us that we had become those image bearers of Christ, and we had to go into the world to be able to share that. And that was the goal, even before Adam and Eve went and ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and Eve, was they said to multiply and fill the earth. That was the duty. They were never meant to stay in the garden. They were to multiply and be fruitful and to go and to spread. So even after they left the garden on not so good occasions, they were still fulfilling that original mission they had to go into all the world. But when that happened and they had that disobedience and they did end up leaving the garden, that goodness, the goodness of the world was never retaken away. You don't see that. You know, you do see that he says, hey, your hands are cursed. The work is cursed. Now you can be harder to get the job done. You know, that is there, but God doesn't say, hey, all of you are now completely devoid of goodness. He doesn't take away the image of himself from Adam and Eve and from all humanity. That remains still. The goodness of even the earth remains there. You know, that was never taken away either. That's not in the scriptures. In fact, you really see this, and this really odd thing is that Adam and Eve is not even talked about in the rest of the Old Testament. It is silence when it comes to Adam and Eve. Adam's mentioned one time in one kind of family tree, I think, in Chronicles, but other than that, it is silence from Adam and Eve, because that really wasn't the point of the story. The point in the version of Adam and Eve was that they did not listen to God, and therefore they actually had to leave in the promised land, and they had to then end up dying. And the story really was to echo what the story of Israel was. And Israel had laid out before them the Torah, the commands of God, do this and don't do this. And but Moses said, if you follow the Torah, you will have life. If you do not follow the Torah, you will have death. Joshua said, we lay before you life and death, make your choice. That's the same choice as Adam and Eve. And the example, the story of Adam and Eve, and the warning to people of Israel was, hey, if you don't obey the Torah, this is going to happen. We don't want that to happen, right? That was really the equating of the story behind what Adam and Eve would go to. And that's why you don't really see it. But again, that goodness never comes out. In fact, throughout the scripture, you hear a lot about the goodness of creation, and God is the God or the Lord of creation, and how everything is in there. Now, Paul does come in and brings up Adam and Eve later on when he's talking to the Corinthians, when he's talking to the Romans, and he's talking about these Gentiles, trying to convince them that, hey, you need to know about this Jesus Messiah here. You need to pay attention. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to go back to the first couple, and I'm going to say, you Romans, you Corinthians, you Romans, you need to listen, because you are part of the first creation, just as like everybody else. Yeah, we know you're not Abraham's kids. Yeah, we know you're not followers of Moses, but you still need to pay attention because of Adam and Eve. And Jesus is the new Adam. So just like death came in through Adam, so life comes in through Jesus. That kind of echoes what Romans 5 and Corinthians 15 is trying to say. So again, these verses are being used there. They're not really trying to say everything's horrible, there is no goodness. No, we are still image bearers of the Most High, image bearers of who we are. Now, with that said, there still is this time that we are born in the world in which it is easy to do harm and hard to do good, right? We're in a world, and I don't think that's any argument from that. We have rapes, and we have pain and sorrow. We have wars. We have abuse. We have the natural disasters. We have anger. We have greed, and we have selfishness, and we have pride, and we have all this stuff all wrapped in it. And it is definitely in us and around us to be able to where it's easy to make those bad decisions, and a lot of times it's hard to be able to make those good ones. And Paul himself even said that in Romans. He's like, hey, the things that I want to do, I don't do. The things I don't want to do, I end up doing, right? Like, this is what's going on. But just because it's hard, just because it is difficult, doesn't mean that all goodness has been removed from humanity, right? Doesn't mean that everything has come out. So, in fact, this is where the church is. If we look historically at our church, and I think we really do need to pay attention to our elders that have walked on before us and how they looked at things. And you see that both the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic have also rejected total depravity. Going back to Augustine and Hippo, back then, Eastern Orthodox took as the eastern side of the church, which was still part of the church. There really was only one church in the 400s and 500s. It was the church. There wasn't really the divisions coming in there. But you had the Greek-oriented churches over in Greek and in Israel and in Egypt and those kind of people. And they were a little bit different than the Latin churches of North Africa and Rome and Italy and the British Isles and stuff of that nature. And you see the eastern half of the empire basically said, like, Augustine, you're kind of off the rocker. We don't really know what you're doing over here talking about this kind of stuff. But you be you, we'll be us, but we're not going to totally lock into that one. And they actually did say, it's like, we believe that human nature remains inherently good after the fall. Mankind is not totally deprived. We're still made in the image of God. People are capable of doing good, although the bondage to death and the influence of the devil can dull that perception of what's good and lead us into all kinds of evil. So we still have that bondage to death that comes in. There's still, again, it is easy to do harm and it is hard to do good. But again, human nature still remains good. Now, that is really powerful to listen to. And for me, as a believer, as a father, as I began to realize that, you know what? When my children are talking and going, they're trying the best they can to be able to do it, but it's hard. Here I am in my 40s, and it's still hard for me sometimes to do what's right. I know I should be wary of my own pride, or wary of gluttony, worried about the shame or just those desires that lust and things that come in it. But even on myself, I find myself doing the things that I know I should not do, and not doing the things that I probably should be doing. And is my children any more human? In fact, they're still learning. Their muscles have not yet been formed. They're still working those muscles. And so as a parent, I'm not raising this demon child that come out and evil and probably trying to take over. I am raising a child made in the image of the Most High, who's trying to learn how to navigate a hard and complex world. And they're trying to do it, and they're trying to form their muscles and their memories, and they're trying to form who they are. And they need my help to be able to pull them back and give them grace and give them hope and give them love to be able to say, hey, you know what? That's maybe not a good idea. Maybe that's not where you need to do. Maybe this is the easier way. And it is hard. It's hard when they're coming after you. It's hard to be able to take that, but we get to learn those lessons. And, as we learn from our children, as we learn to keep our anger in check, and we keep our mouth from just, ripping them apart, as we kind of learn that peace and patience and kindness and self-control, the fruits of the Spirit that Galatians talks about, the hope is that we can then build those muscles. Parenting can help build those muscles that then we can then offer that to other people, to our bosses, our coworkers, our neighbors, maybe the authorities and the cops, or those are literally trying to kill us in some parts of the world, right? That we can then be like Jesus, who on the cross said, Father, I forgive them, because we've built our own muscles of our own fruits of the spirits have come out because we've had to deal with that, instead of just letting that, kind of, slide over us and being able to say, no, 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 you demon child, get there behind, it's just, come on. Let that actually, how we view our children, how we view each other, how we view ourselves, for that matter. Talking about mental health. If I'm always thinking about myself as being this evil, demonic kind of total depravity person, it's like, is that really helpful? Now, we got to be careful. This is balance as Tohi, where we don't want to go too far and be able to say, hey, we're all that. Pride is definitely a sin, but it's the wallowing in self-pity is just as much as a sin, right? We need to kind of hold ourselves in balance and be able to say there's a healthy sense of pride of, I am made in the image of God. I am a light bearer of the Most High. I am a son. I am a daughter of the Most High. I have been called, chosen, and blessed and called forth into the world because of my Father, and then He who calls us forth, who made us from nothing. Like, that is a mission, that is a heart, that is a living that I want to embrace. So when we think about this one and we be able to shift our minds on these beliefs, we can be able to reestablish even a better sense of who we are. So within this, and this is where I want to be able to share with and wrap up on there, is that I know total depravity is one of those key concepts of a lot of church doctrines. But I actually encourage you to rethink that and to redo it. And if you already are on that journey of rethinking and kind of really unpacking that, well, I say keep going. Keep going, my sister, my brother. Keep going. Because there is a wealth outside of just that narrow view of that medieval Europe view of who we are. There is a wealth of information within the wider, deeper churches that we have that he has a better view on humanity. So keep going. I think specifically, if we're looking at Genesis, John Walton has some great books on Genesis and on the lost art, the lost message of Genesis, lost world, Genesis 1 and 2, that really can unpack some of what it means to be the image of God. Calista War has a great book also called on the Eastern Orthodox belief system called The Orthodox Way, which has been a wonderful me. And then there's lots of other resources out there for you guys to unpack as well. But thank you guys again. Would appreciate your guys' listening. Keep walking on the journey, and may the Creator of heaven and earth guide you. May they direct your steps, and may you see more of the Creator every day as you follow Him. Blessings on your journey, everybody. Until next time.